Go for it, Jen. Every time that voice. We always like to ground ourselves in one way or another in our work, and that's either through sharing group agreements for the Alliance or reading our mission or vision. So, would someone be interested or willing to read our vision statement, which is the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide, our vision statement? And it was on the screen. There it is. Would someone be willing to read it out for all of us?
Be happy to read that, Keller. Oh, go ahead,
Thank
Craig.
All right. In Oregon, all young people have hope, feel safe asking for hope, can find access to the right help at the right time to prevent suicide, and live in communities that foster healing, connection, and wellness. And I realized I should have read the heading, Vision, what are we working toward?
Great job. Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. So yeah, that is always just a nice way of just grounding us in this work, a good reminder about why we do this work and the importance of this work. And with that, we will, I think Jen is going to put us into small groups. And again, we will not leave you there very long, we promise.
So
Yes.
Gally, I'll just jump in and say, the small groups are for you to get to know each other a little bit. So introduce yourselves. And then we thought you might enjoy talking about what a piece of art, music, or movie was that has influenced you and how has it influenced you. And, you don't have to agonize about finding the most important piece of art in your life. It's just one that has influenced you in any way, just to share.
So these, oh, okay. Okay, so these are the four main recommendations related to monitoring and supporting Addie's Act. And these are all a little bit more broad as well. So utilizing surveys or data collected from school districts and student populations that include mental health needs, training effectiveness, and implementation of district plans. So Addie's Act is currently monitored by Division 22 reporting to ODE, which is district self-reporting. So that is one thing that the schools committee has talked a lot about. And the difference between monitoring policy implementation and Addie's Act plans implementation in districts. And ODE can talk a little bit more about that later if they want, if you're not familiar with Division 22 and have questions. And so what we are wanting to see is what other ways can we be monitoring it? How do we know that this rule that is applying to school districts is actually reaching school buildings, is reaching youth? Another recommendation, develop comprehensive framework for schools to monitor maybe on their own. So providing some of that system and guidance, maybe like procedures or processes, and that's kind of left open. So like universal screening might be one part of that, for example. But how training is implemented in down to a school building, what staff are being trained. And I know all of that is being worked on through Big River programs. Being on the same page about what curriculum is most effective with students, or what programming, what initiatives. So really providing some more, now that we've been implementing Addie's Act for a few years now, what do we really want to push for? What do we know is being effective in schools K through 12? And providing recommendations that are age appropriate and based on where the school is, because we know that urban and rural schools need different programs. And I just saw you unmuted, so I want to pause. I know.
No,
okay.
I'm just getting ready for my section.
Okay. Next is expand how school buildings are being supported with implementation. So just looking at continuous improvement. So we know, I imagine we'll get an update on how many posted plans are out there. Addie's Act requires that districts have plans posted on their website visible to the public, such as if like a parent or a community member wanted to go find that, they have access to it. So moving beyond that, what are we going to keep using to monitor the progress of Addie's Act to make sure that it is being implemented? And what plan should like a school building have in place opposed to what the district level support looks like? And so that's also looking at some of the funding that we have. So we have SSPSs through ODE, which are through ESDs, and so many of you are here. And then Lines for Lives SSPW program historically. So we've had supports to provide technical assistance to districts, but what does that look like moving forward? So either trying to expand or make that look different to make sure that it's continuing to be effective. And then lastly, identify specific trend data related to reports made by students, families to improve responses. So looking at risk factors. So what other programs, including maybe the Student Success Acts or any other type of data that maybe we have related to bullying, harassment, housing or family circumstances, any of the Addie's Act population specific data that we have. So really just trying to see what the cross is with that and how can it guide our effectiveness and technical assistance, and what does the schools committee want to focus on moving forward? Okay, I'm going to pause if I missed anything. Annette, Justin, anybody actually?
That was perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
You're great.
Thank you for filling in the acronyms.
Super appreciate you being here when you're not feeling well. We had a number of policy recommendations, and one thing I want to note before talking about this is that I think that we have a next step at our schools advisory committee. I appreciate Jill Baker's quote of, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And so a lot of these recommendations are kind of big lifts. And so one of the things I think as an alliance we need to do is probably some real ease impact assessment, see where there'll be the most impact in making change, and then also where there might be some easier wins that we could have, and to thread the needle to find the right combination of high impact but achievable goals. So just on a high level, in terms of our policy development, Oregon's really in a better place than many other states because of our the Student Success Act and the fact that there are student success initiatives for a whole variety of communities: LGBTQ, African American and Black, Latino. I think there's just was funded one that's a Indigenous Native American. These plans are very aspirational, but they give schools a framework for how do you really support this community. And so we want to really leverage the work that's been done on that to support schools in implementing it. I think that ongoing training and workforce engagement is absolutely key. And I think that I would have Justin speak about Senate Bill 283 because he's more familiar with it than I am, but I know that it was an investment in the school workforce, and we want to really be sure that we are building up access to behavioral health resources. We want to continue to use evidence-based practices, but we want to also have programs that are innovative and promote things like the Forward Project, which provided funding for suicide prevention in the central part of our state. One of the things we would love is for the Alliance to have a similar role with the Oregon Department of Education that we have with the Oregon Health Authority. Whether that is informal or in statute remains up for discussion, but that we just see that if we're going to do suicide prevention in the space of schools, that we absolutely need to have that connection between ODE and OHA. And I just want to acknowledge that I think that in the last year, Oregon Department of Education has really been much more present at our meetings, and that's been really, I feel like, progress in terms of us working together. It feels like we're really developing ongoing working relationships, et cetera. But we may ultimately want to look at whether this is something we would want to legislatively address. Next slide. One of the areas where we think there's an opportunity would be to take another look at the administrative rules for Addie's Act. When Addie's Act was first put into place, the Alliance really pushed hard to try and get something into the administrative rules addressing communication between schools and their partners around care transitions. We were not successful at getting that into the rules, but we continue to think that that is an area that really needs some attention and support. And there might be other areas that we could really clarify how schools can comply with the legislation. I'm not going to walk through each of these, but I will say that taking a look at the Division 22 monitoring and really having a detailed chart that includes an adequate definition of standard of care so that districts and their boards have something to compare very clearly against when they self-report on their compliance with Division 22. And the last thing which we are suggesting as a policy is that it would be really wonderful if student ID cards across the state did what ID cards in a number of districts are already doing, which is to promote awareness of 988, we didn't say it on here, but the crisis text line and youth line resources. And so those are some of the broad policy areas that we made recommendations around. And so gritty systems issues. And so we gave OHA and Oregon Department of Education the challenging task of responding to all of this input. And I am just really grateful that we got a big yes from them on coming to talk with us at this meeting about some of their thinking and responses to our thinking. And I am not exactly sure who's going to be here. Oh, it looks like Jennifer and Chelsea, welcome.
I just want to add before Kelsey and Jennifer, you speak, I just want to, again, kudos to the OHA and ODE team for being so responsive. We really, the Alliance really appreciates the relationship that we have with both of you. And like Annette said, I feel like the relationship that we have really nurtured over the past year or so with ODE has just been amazing. So I just want to say, like, having you all come to these meetings isn't something that just happens, right? It happens because we have these relationships and we've nurtured these relationships on both sides. So I just want to really explicitly call out the relationship that we have with OHA and ODE, and just are so appreciative of collaborating with both of you. So take it away, ODE and OHA partners. It's all yours.
Thank you. I am actively looking for Chelsea so I can see
I
her.
am here. Can you see me? I saw you. You popped onto my
Oh, there you
screen.
are. That's great. So if I could, I just want to say thank you for inviting us to provide the response together. I want to say thank you to Joe Baker, who is just one of the best partners we can ask for, who is the person who recommended that we do this and sort of has guided us through the process. I also want to say thank you to Clara and Justin for the work that they put into putting this report together. It's been eye-opening for us to have this information, to have it reported out, and to be able to like refer to it and have a document that we can look at has been really wonderful for our team. In the past year, I'm so happy to hear that everyone is just aware that we've been making a real determined effort to be in the space and to show up all the time. My colleague Noel Kennedy, who is our school safety and wellness prevention specialist at ODE, who is coming up on his 1-year anniversary, has really stepped into this role and just been a real relationship maker and bridge, I think, for ODE, for OHA, and all of our suicide prevention partners in the state. And our colleague Jennifer Johnson also can't be here. She's had a death in the family, but she manages our statewide school safety and prevention specialist coordination and the statewide school safety and prevention specialists, so many SSPSs. And we've just really coalesced as a team. All of us started just about a year ago and have come in and had the opportunity to take on this work and really drive it forward. So we really appreciate you asking us to be here today and giving us the opportunity to present. And again, thank you to Chelsea and Shanda, our partners at OHA. It's been a transformational year, I think.
I would agree with that. I actually was reflecting with Jill this morning of like what it looked like 5 years ago, Gally, of like a very different world of relationship and even the number of humans that were at the state agency showing up in this space and thinking about this work has transformed. And so yeah, I went a little further back of like, we are just in a completely different space as state agencies alongside you as an alliance. So very exciting. And I just want to do a quick introduction and a caveat. I have to sort of have a hard switch to phone if I will at 10:40. I have to take my husband to a medical appointment. So I know we have our time until I think it's till 10:40. So, but if we start going longer, the conversation goes longer, just know my team's here and I may have to switch to phone. So I just wanted to say that. But I'm Chelsea Holcomb. I use she, her pronouns, and I oversee child and family behavioral health at the Oregon Health Authority. And Jill and Shanda, the rock stars mentioned previously, live in my unit. And I am lucky to have them. And I think, Jennifer, are you going to start? Are we going to do kind of a like per recommendation back and forth?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Awesome.
Okay, so I guess I'll read them out just so that everybody can kind of get your mental space, and hopefully it won't take too long for us to add that also. So we're going to do system infrastructure and recommendations. Thank you to Jill for putting this together for us. So the first one that we're addressing is state agencies should come to agreement on what is expected of school districts to be in compliance with Addie's Act and develop systems for monitoring this. And I really appreciate what Claire had just talked through a little bit in terms of the fact that this is a Division 22 standard, as everyone talks about and knows, and that the department, we don't monitor, it's self-reported compliance. We do as a team. So I don't think I introduced myself as Jenny Donovan, the coordinator for the Safe and Inclusive Schools team. So as a team, we do track this information. Noel, who's with us today, is the primary person in charge of this. And we work with our school safety and prevention specialists throughout the state. They collect the information and work directly with districts to see where they're at on their plans, to make sure that they have a policy posted. Like Claire said, we're still not at 100%. And I will, because she mentioned it, give the update that we are, in terms of policies in place, out of our 197 school districts, we have 169, that's 85%. And suicide prevention plan completed is at 160 districts, that's 81%. And we might, if we have time, I can let Noel talk a little bit about the challenges they face that we're hearing back. But in terms of monitoring, it's a scary word for districts to hear from ODE. They don't like it when we say we're monitoring, and we don't monitor. We track for support purposes. And I think what I'll be saying over and over as we talk about this is the role of ODE in working with districts is never monitoring, it's never oversight. It's guidance, it's best practices, it's partnerships. And my hope is that as we've built this partnership here in the Alliance over the last year, where I can say it seems like it maybe wasn't as strong earlier. I'm hoping that that's also translating to the partnerships that our team and ODE has with districts in terms of doing this work. I can say that in the past year with this new team and with Jen Johnson, who I mentioned previously, who can't be here, the training of the school safety and prevention specialist was initiated when she came in as biweekly trainings. And so they get together biweekly in the month to go over different aspects of what the SSPSs are charged with, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But to really highlight and create that community of practice. So there's information sharing about what's happening in the districts and the schools. And I really feel like through that process and through us paying close attention and keeping this dashboard that we have of where the schools are or where the districts are in terms of compliance and what their challenges are, we'll be able to do the work that is required in helping them build up their plans, build up their capacity, and not have to sit in the idea of Division 22 compliance, because we don't have a lot of authority there. Until a school self-reports that they're out of compliance or until a complaint is made, ODE has no authority to go into the school and say, hey, you're out of compliance with Addie's Act. We have no authority to proactively go out and say, you need to get in compliance. But we do have the partnerships to go out and say, hey, we noticed you don't have this posted, or that this part of your Addie's Act plan isn't very robust. Is there something that we can help you with? Here's an SSPS who can provide you all kinds of training and information, and we'll talk to you about what your specific district needs there and what kind of time constraints or personnel constraints or budget constraints you're looking at to help you figure out a solution for you. And all in there, I will say from the outset, I talk a lot. So I'm going to try to narrow that down and give Chelsea some space.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about having an alliance and a group that oversees legislation and things like this, you know, the YSIP has taken on, I think you already outlined it, around the different areas of metric and accountability on the YSIP for 2024. So looking at the things you just described, right? Do they have a policy? Do they have a plan? Is it on their website? And I think, you know, the next step that I think we want to look at, and again, and I'm saying this all with an alignment of what Jennifer just said with Noel's position and what the SSPS teams are doing, is really doing that a scan, right, to look at those accountabilities and in partnership with ODE as a metric of accountability for the YSIP. So again, I think to Jennifer's point, not overstepping ODE's oversight or statute authority, whether they have it or not, but from a YSIP perspective, that is Oregon's plan. And so making sure that we're, you know, again, in line step and alignment with ODE and the position we have at Lines for Life to make sure that we are continuing to monitor that. And I think to your point, Jennifer, that when an incident does happen, right, a death, suicide, is that it has helped different regions also create, it shouldn't be that way, but it has helped identify an urgency in other regions when that has happened, and those components have not been in place. So again, staying in alignment, but also using the alliance and the YSIP as a way of looking at metrics and accountability.
Okay, I will go on. Actually, I'll pause. Do we want to take questions as we go through, or should we do sort of go through the recommendations and then go to the end for questions?
I'm thinking for timing, we should probably get through.
Okay.
Just look at her.
Sure.
I don't know how the group
Go
feels.
back up. There's so many on that first page. It's not just the one. Okay. So ODE should clearly define the core supports districts can expect from SSPS positions, consider suicide prevention expertise when hiring these positions, also recommend SSPS positions have public education and implementation science knowledge. So I will say in terms of the core supports that districts can expect from SSPSs, and again, SSPSs are school safety and prevention specialists. They are part of our implementing legislation in ORS 349, 341, and they were part of the Student Success Act in Section 36. So that section of the Student Success Act and the ORS really lay out what the core supports of SSPSs are, and that's to support districts with suicide prevention, bullying prevention, and these are suicide prevention, intervention, postvention, bullying, harassment, cyberbullying, intimidation. Sexual violence was actually added to the OARs so that they do that work as well. Behavioral safety assessment teams, helping set up the teams and participate where needed, and promotion of the school safety, I'm sorry, the Safe Oregon tip line. So those are the core supports of the SSPSs. And the trainings that I mentioned earlier that we now do bi-monthly for the SSPSs, we cover all of those different core supports. It not necessarily in succession. We have different speakers who come in who do specific presentations on one of the core supports. They did CERC training recently as well. And in terms of the hiring, so ODE doesn't hire SSPSs. We provide grant and aid to ESDs. ESDs are the hiring entity for SSPSs. We are currently working with OAESD to reach out to all of the ESD superintendents and really get an understanding of what are your challenges in hiring SSPSs? What are your challenges in the roles that they play within your ESD? How can we better support that? How can we better define their roles? And this is something that we started in collaboration with OAESD a couple months ago, and there's going to be a survey that goes out to them so that we can collect more information and provide more support to districts in how they're educational service districts in how they're recruiting. So we have grant agreements with them that gives us a little bit more oversight over what that role is doing. There's requirements in terms of them attending our trainings and other trainings and outreach. So there's a lot in the grant agreements that gives ODE a little bit of influence, but it is the ESDs who actually do the hiring. And we are working to help them better define the role and have a better understanding of, like, if you're hiring, what does your ESD need? But also, what are the parameters of the position that you have to ensure? And I think we decided we would just answer that because, Chelsea, I don't know if you want to chime in, but you guys don't often play a role there.
Yeah, we're not going to develop your position descriptions.
Right. Except for interacting with the SSPSs. So I'll go to the next one. State agencies should partner with OEA and OSEA to prioritize release time and substitutes for educators to attend suicide prevention trainings appropriate to their role. So if I'm starting there, I'll say, OEA and OSEA being unions, this is all dealt with at the local level in collective bargaining. And for the most part, as a state agency, we don't make a lot of statements about how they should work in collective bargaining. We're always supportive of the teachers having more time for training. And we realize that there's a balance. Like, I don't know if it was Claire or Justin who said it earlier, like there's so many competing requirements in districts for trainings for all of the different areas. And how do we ensure that they're getting adequate training and good training in terms of suicide prevention? Again, like I said earlier, you're going to hear me say this a lot, it's through partnerships with the districts. We don't actively work with OEA or OSEA on what their collective bargaining pieces would be around that, but we obviously support the idea of trying to ensure that the teachers and staff are getting the trainings that they need. And I'll go to the next one. So create guidance for schools and districts about which ADDIES Act information should be public facing, share proactively with parents, and what is internal. And I support us working together, especially with OHA, to get as much guidance as we can for districts around to support what they need here, collecting information from them and making sure that they understand what needs to be public facing, what's going on the website, where things need to be provided. It is outlined in the ORS and the OARs, but it never hurts to remind the districts of them. They have a myriad of laws that they comply with. It never hurts to remind them, hey, here's some really good guidance on this. Noel created a really great one-pager early in his time here, just to lay out the specifics of ADDIES Act in like a little brief thing that a district could look at. And so continuing to provide supports to them where it's this quick reference to say, hey, remember to do all these things. I think we're always going to be supportive. And the more we partner with OHA to make sure the materials are really relevant and best practices, I think is just going to be, it's going to be better for districts and for schools and students. And the last one So require or encourage districts to adopt policies that require training to recognize and address suicidal risk for discipline-focused professionals. And I will say, OHA and I, we both had the same response, which is we can't really require them unless it's legislated. But like I said in the last question, anything that we can do to help districts understand how important these training requirements are and help them adopt those policies to get more people in the schools trained around suicidal risk, to ensure they're getting deep training and understanding, is something that we are going to continue to work on as our SIS team and in our partnership with OHA.
And I think for these three, I just wanted to say, like, OHA doesn't have a direct relationship with the OEA and OSEA. I was actually asking Jill this morning, I'm like, new acronyms. Acronyms for me, not the humans in them, but I think, I think it's similar to what you just said, Jennifer. We also want to make sure that we're being responsive to what the schools need. So it's, again, going back to what Gally talked about, like, this is about relationship and communication and coordination. So while we all may have a great idea of what guidance is still needed and what we think or want the local folks to do, we have to be in coordination with them. But we want to add, this recommendation to that list of things that we're still building for local regions and local school districts, because we want to make sure that we're tracking all of those things, and as we're either creating new materials, I think, as Jennifer was just saying, and new things that schools are asking for, that we're identifying through the recommendations above as we're providing technical assistance and asking for what folks need, that we're adapting the guidance for what is needed. I don't know if I'm saying that well, Jill, if you want to better articulate with my cold brain.
I can hear it in your
I know, my head's just like full.
No, you articulated it well. Just naming that there, as we went through the recommendations, there were several that were like, okay, there seems to be a whole pile of like guidance that would be helpful. And so it would be helpful from the schools committee to help prioritize. To what Annette said, we can do anything but not everything. Like, what should we pull to the top of that pile to support first, second, and third round, that type of thing. So the last three on this slide felt like they went into that pile of like guidance things that would be helpful.
And I would just add to that, broader than just suicide prevention, the discipline piece it's being talked about in many different areas. And I know the pressure gets put on ODE to fix all the things. And so I think thinking about potentially guidance around, maybe I'm not saying it right, but I think sometimes it's looking at sort of how are we managing behaviors in Oregon versus looking at needs and wellness of what children actually need. So that's my own random commentary that has nothing to do with this, but I hear from parents daily on.
Okay. So we are moving on to monitoring recommendations. Okay, so support routinely gathering information from schools and districts around needs, training effectiveness, and implementation progress, similar to the schools project and forward project. Note, not connect to any punitive or potentially punitive actions. Again, I really support us reaching out to districts and really trying to understand their needs. And it's something that we, as our current Safe and Inclusive Schools team, we're really highlighting our partnerships and our conversations with ESDs and districts about how we can support them with Addie's Act and our entire suite of work that falls to us under the statewide school safety and prevention system. It's always also on our minds, and something that obviously we hear through these conversations, that districts are inundated with reporting requirements. And, we often think about the larger districts with the staff, but we have to keep in mind those small and rural districts that have, you know, the superintendent who drives the bus, who serves the lunch, who does recess duty, and also does all of the grant making paperwork and make sure that they're in compliance with all of their government grants, all of their state grants. And so we want to ensure that as we're coming in and working collaboratively, I think we have a really good opportunity being a small team and having the staff that we do for this work to try to take some of the burden off of them and ask them, what do you need from us? What is it that you need from us that we can help you with, and how do you need it? And so I'm very much in support of the idea around and working together to create more information around training effectiveness, around implementation progress, so that we are getting from them what you need and then providing back the easiest implementation recommendations and practices that we can for them, so that they can have more robust systems and better understanding, but we're giving it to them after finding out what, like having those conversations to say, what are the supports that you need at your district, at your schools? And so I think this is a great recommendation. And, you know, I don't know if we can go into information collection as like a process or as a system, but certainly building those relationships one-on-one to understand what each district and each educational service district needs. Just pausing and see if Chelsea wanted to chime in.
I know, sorry, I'm looking. Oh, you might have already talked about this. Sorry, I got a little distracted. But yeah, the Big River, because we have the Big River evaluation efforts that are looking at effectiveness in those implementation. But again, looking at this, we want to get better at that. And so looking at these lessons learned and recommendations to do that. So again, it's more in just agreement that more needs to be done to do this. And I would just, for my own commentary of just saying, like, it is hard to measure training effectiveness in any model. So I think as we do that journey together of finding where is that happening really well, and what can we learn from other measurements like that to either implement or steal.
And so the next one is establish a comprehensive evaluation framework to assess the overall effectiveness of mental health programs. And so in answering these, Jill and I talked about this a little bit, but this is a little bit outside of our purview of our programs, both at OHA and ODE. And I don't want to speak for OHA, but I can say in sort of when we were talking about our response. So what we kind of agreed to is that we'd love to pass this on to, within ODE, we have a new health and education office with Kati Mosley as the head of that, and passing this information on to her. And I don't want to speak for you, Chelsea, but I can read our answer, which was that we would pass it on to Fran Pearson at OHA.
Yeah, and Molly Haynes, we have a health and education director, that works very closely with both our agencies. So, but it's a good recommendation for sure, and very complicated.
Jennifer, can I just give a little time check? So we have about 3 minutes left of this agenda time, and it might, I don't know, usually our Alliance leaders put in a little bit of space, but I did want to name, if we go to the next slide, I think from what I would imagine, they would, the Alliance would like to hear the answer to make the Alliance to Prevent Suicide an official advisory to ODE, and then opening up the Addis Act. And I wondered, actually, it's not one of the recommendations, but I wondered about the information about the request for information from a couple of years ago, and whether, and the funding for that had been at the to OHA, to Alliance for Life, for the school suicide prevention and wellness team.
Sure. And I know that, Chelsea, you have a hard stop at 10:40, or you have a switch over at 10:40. So I want to give you an opportunity before you have to switch over. But I think these are mostly questions for ODE. So if you want.
No, get started. And I'm going to try to move to my phone.
We also, to Jill, to piggyback on what you said, we didn't do a good job of padding our agenda this time. We have a pretty tight agenda, so we do need to stop soon with this conversation, knowing that this is probably one of many conversations about moving this work forward, and so knowing that this is not the end all be all. So
yes, this is not the last time we will be with you. And I just also want to give a little teaser. Our team is actually presenting at the schools committee at their next meeting, I think. The next meeting, I see Justin nodding his head. So the next meeting, we'll actually be giving a presentation. And if anyone is interested, you can come and ask us questions there too. So just really quickly, an overview of the things that Joe mentioned. First in the funding. So the funding that was, there was an RFI put out, a request for information for suicide prevention supports. There was some question around how that would go out. What we, as the team that came in, requested and what was granted to us is that we use that funding to ensure that we continue to support the school safety and prevention specialists. There was some ESSER funding that came in that gave us SSPSs across the state at all 19 ESDs. And so what we used that funding for was to support that ESSER funding that's going away not next year, it's 2024 now, going away this fall, to sort of support the funding that we had already gotten from the state to make it so that we have a full 19 SSPS positions across the state through this biennium. And we've put in a pop request to continue that funding for next year. So that's really our core supports. And with the training team that we have right now, we really feel like we have the partnerships and the ability to provide that training to the SSPSs so they can go out and provide their full suite of supports. In terms of the Alliance to Prevent Suicide, I can't really speak to that as a legislative concept or as something moving forward. I can tell you that the Safe and Inclusive Schools team has applications out for creating our own advisory group. And we've reserved a chair for the Alliance and for OHA as part of our advisory group to bring in that knowledge. And so hopefully that will bridge the gap in having that consistent input from both the Alliance and from OHA when it looks at our advisory group. And if you want information, I'll throw the application link in the chat after this. And around Division 22 and opening up the rules. So I don't think at this point, and I can say as the Safe and Inclusive Schools team, we really are the ones who kind of hold Addie's Act within the department. There hasn't been a lot of conversation within the department about opening Addie's Act. And as the department, we're very aware of our education partners who worked on this legislation. A lot of times when legislation is going through, ODE, as most state agencies, is neutral on most legislation. We did support Addie's Act. But opening up the rules, we would have a lot of conversations, a lot of questions from the Alliance about what they would want to do, but also bringing in our education partners who worked on the legislation and, Basic Rights Oregon, who worked so hard on the legislation, and bringing all of those individuals back in to have a conversation about what was needed there. Because I think from our perspective, as has been sort of the theme of my response, is that Division 22 doesn't provide, I think, the oversight that a lot of people wish that it did. And we've had a lot of conversations recently with the governor's office and with different organizations and giving presentations about what Division 22 means. And for our part, I think, as our team is working on this, rather than focusing on looking at rule requirements and expanding it and making it really explicit, which doesn't happen very often in rules, we're still looking at those partnerships. We want to reach out to the districts in partnership and do the work that we can without legislating it, because the legislation is there and enacted. The OARs are there to support it. And the more information and guidance and information on best practices that we provide, that's going to be the same thing that we could do even if it were explicit in Addie's Act or in the rules. Because we're never going to be an oversight board, and we're not here to punish anyone. We're always here to help. We're here to support and give information and guidance and take on that burden with districts to get the information that they need. And working in a local control state, it's always going to be the purview of the district as to how they do what they do. And I know that isn't ever a popular response, ever. But it is how the state operates, and it is how ODE operates. But we're not opposed to having the conversations, and we're going to be around to keep having them, I think is the important thing.
Hey, Jennifer, 2 more minutes.
Oh, I don't even need to talk anymore.
Chelsea had to drop off
Okay.
to go be a human person. So I think the one theme that was different kind of in our responses, especially around Division 22, is around the transition of care component. And so that continues to be a thing that we're trying to get better at normalizing, that it's okay that ODE has one stance and OHA might have a different stance. And that's like, there's 2 valid opinions to have on a topic. And so from OHA's perspective about the transitions of care, we agree that from the Jerry Gabay wording from 2019 of being able to encourage or require school districts to try to enter into agreements with hospitals around transitions of care. And that's remains something that that we would advocate for if and when the rules did open back up.
So I'm hearing that our ODE partners are coming to the schools committee to have more of a conversation. I was going to say I'm hesitant to open up for questions because I want to give you all a break, and so I'm gonna
can
ask.
always email questions. I'll drop our team link in the chat, and really anything. I think there are a lot of questions about where OD is showing up and how we're showing up, and I'm not sure I have an answer to all of them, but I will do my best to find one and to give you information about where we are and where we're going.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jennifer, Chelsea, other folks who had a part in putting that slide deck together and responding to all of the purple paper recommendations. I know that probably took you all some time. So thank you very much for your time and effort and your partnership around that. And looking forward to continuing this conversation as we continue to finesse, what our schools need and what our community needs and how to support staff and students and everyone. So thank you, OHA and ODE partners, once again for your collaboration. On that note, folks, absolutely. It is 10:46 according to my time. We would like to honor giving you a break and do not ever want to plan to cut those short. So why don't we come back to this virtual space at 10:56. You will hear my voice luring you back about 10:55. Please take a bio break, tea break, coffee break, stretch break, 10:55, and we will go into our presentation. See you in 10 minutes. Okay, folks, if you're not already headed back to your computer, come towards my voice. We'd love to see your
Really
faces.
giving me the whole poltergeist vibe right
I
now.
know. Come towards
Come
my
towards the
voice.
light.
Come towards the light. Poltergeist was one of those movies. I don't know about you all, but like I think I saw it too early in my developmental stages of life. And I remember that part where she's like, doing that thing to her face that I won't, whatever. And to this very day, like many, many, many years later, I cannot watch scary movies. And I blame it on my mother primarily, but I blame it on Poltergeist. So I don't know if that's happened to anybody else, but I blame it on my mother. Right, John? You know what I'm talking about, John Davies. Yeah. I think she needed someone to watch Poltergeist with her, and I was it. But it is like literally, it's given me like an ace score.
Yes, yeah,
Right?
yes, yeah. I agree that there's certain movies, and there's some scary movies I enjoy, but there's some other ones that just really get at my soul and really,
Right. They just stick with you, don't they, John?
yeah,
They stick with you.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
And it is rated PG, Rachel, you're right. All right, folks.
Ellie,
On that note,
Ellie, I have to say that is very funny. It scared you so it gave you an ace score.
yeah, I was like, it gave me an A score. I mean, I come from a divorced family. That's an A score. But I also watched Poltergeist at an early age, and that is an A score.
I can relate. Yeah,
know.
I'm serious. Like that. Yeah, we're laughing about it, but there's a
I know.
there's a serious element to that.
Jaws must have like destroyed an entire
I know. Jaws, yeah, Rachel Jaws. I know. I'm telling you.
Clockwork Orange.
Clockwork Orange. Yes.
Oh
Gordon,
yes, that was very disturbing. Yeah.
If you're not in therapy to talk about your family of origin, you're in therapy to talk about Poltergeist. So, all right. On that note, folks, we are going to transition into the next part of our quarterly meeting, which is presentation from our very own Charlotte Lumbee and Michelle Bangen. And many of you have asked for this presentation. And so I really appreciate Michelle and Charlotte bringing this information to us. And I don't know about you all in your respective communities or counties. There are many coalitions, at least in Clackamas County, that are working on substance use prevention. And then there are many groups that are working on like houselessness prevention and suicide prevention. And we're all very siloed. And so one of the things that I would like for you all to be thinking about when you're listening to Michelle and Charlotte today is, how do we de-silo this work? How do we intersect the work? Because if you think about the risk factors for substance use and suicide and houselessness, it's all, again, there's a lot of intersectionality. So we're going to learn more, but kind of keep an eye and an ear open of like, how does this work look at you in your community level? How does this intersection work in your community? All right, take it away, Charlotte and Michelle. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Gallie. And you pretty much read my intro script, so I'm not going to belabor the point. A lot of us know about these intersections, but maybe not the level of significance or their overlap in thinking about how we address them together. So that's exactly why we're here. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Michelle Bangen, joined by Charlotte Lumbee. And for those of you who we haven't had the pleasure of meeting just yet, we're the co-founders of Insight Agency for Change. We're a social enterprise inspiring hope, encouraging individual and collective action, and really building capacity for suicide prevention in our communities. We have a combined more than 30 years of experience in a range of injury and violence prevention topics. Just very briefly, my background is in public health and health promotion. I've spent a large portion of my career in higher education, supporting young adults around topics like substance use prevention. Much of my career has been focused on sexual violence prevention, yet another topic that intersects with suicide.
You bet.
And Charlotte, who has been a critical care nurse, an injury prevention coordinator, and even a medical examiner, also has some really valuable lived experience related to this topic. And so I'd love to have you share some of that with us, Charlotte.
All right, thank you. I just want to start by thanking each and every one of you for being here. And in line with what Galli said, one of the things that we're really going to be encouraging you to think about as we work through today's presentation is also, what does this look like at a policy and legislative level? How can we really create change at that level to help guide some of this work? I'm very passionate about this topic. So again, thank you for all being willing to be here and kind of hear what we have to offer. It's very near and dear to me. My lived experience in this topic is, one, I'm a suicide loss survivor of a grandmother and a husband, and my husband had co-occurring things occurring as well. And then I also have lived experience in raising my daughter, who's now 23 years old, who really started struggling with substance use and mental health challenges shortly after her open heart surgery at 13. Some of you may know this story, but again, I don't want to assume everyone in the room does. And I think it plays a significant role in where my passion comes from this. In her case, I found it really, it was so hard. It was such a struggle to get our community, our organizations, facilities to recognize that she needed combined treatment, not to mention just a safe treatment environment. Even ahead of that, she needed an assessment that acknowledged that there was more than one thing happening. It didn't matter what came first, the chicken or the egg, but we needed to be looking at both. My instinct had been all along that her mental health preceded her substance use. And I knew that if we didn't get help for that, it was going to be nearly impossible to find the road to recovery. So, being a nurse and an injury prevention coordinator and doing all the work, I felt so much more equipped than a large majority of our community. And still, even with that, finding resources, advocating for her, it was so hard to find what was needed. I ended up being lost in the crossroads and really struggling, even with everything I had to accommodate her specific needs. It took me almost 5 years to get her into, one, a safe space, and two, a close to co-occurring treatment facility. And I say close to because there's lots of stipulations and ropes that they have to jump through to get to that status. And with that, even ended up having to transfer her out of state in order to get treatment. With those co-occurring needs met, she's actually now 4 years into long-term recovery, and it's amazing. And it continues to be something that as a community, as a state, we can grow in. So I'm going to go ahead and pass off to Michelle for a moment. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte, for that. As an overview of what we're hoping to cover in our limited time together, we'll look at some data that really illustrates the intersections between substance use and suicide, and you'll really get to see how large of that intersection that is. We'll consider based strategies and promising practices with you that will hopefully help communities be cultures that are supportive of individuals and their diagnoses. And you'll have an opportunity to use some of these ideas and explore ways that these intersections could be addressed from a practice and a policy perspective a little bit later today. So lots to cover in a short amount of time, so we're going to be moving quickly. We are happy to share a PDF of this presentation with the Alliance after and for your future reference. So don't feel like you need to scribble all of these things down, but be sure to jot down some questions if you're getting those as we go through, because we may have time for questions at the end. And if not, we're happy to be a resource outside of this meeting. Before we jump in, I want to take just a moment to think about language. You may have seen this table before from mental health first aid. We think it's a nice summary for several examples of person first and person-centered language. Words matter. And using person first and person centered language really serves to decrease stigma, shame, and blame around these very stigmatized topics. These shifts also remind us that individuals living with mental health conditions are not defined by those things. We are whole people, complex humans with many identities. So it's really important that we're doing this work from a person first place. Two terms not on this list that are pertinent to our discussion today, which we want to just briefly cover, are number one, not using the word suicidal to describe a person. People don't want to be defined by having thoughts of suicide or how they may be feeling that day. While suicidal might be used in a lot of different contexts that might be appropriate, we want to be extra thoughtful about how we're talking about people. And then secondly, or instead, we might try to use phrases like a person with thoughts of suicide, or someone who's having suicide behaviors, or maybe even experiencing a suicide crisis, just to name a couple of examples about how we can try to make that shift in our own language. And finally, we'll be using the term co-occurring disorders, as we've already said once a couple times before, or CODs, to mean individuals experiencing more than one mental health challenge or mental health challenge and something like substance use together. So let's do some data review here. Again, you may already know some of these pieces, and you may even have more up-to-date data specifically for our state. The last time we had a chance to pull these numbers, it was for a national conference. Regardless, the next few slides really provide some compelling data as to why we need to be addressing suicide and substance use together. First, of individuals who died by suicide in the US between 2014 and 2016, 46% had a known mental health condition, and 28% had problematic substance use. According to SAMHSA, up to 40% of lethal and non-lethal attempts involve alcohol intoxication. A recent finding here in Oregon is that at least 20% of our suicide deaths involve alcohol. Plus, acute alcohol intoxication significantly increased the risk of suicide attempts, anywhere from 7 to 37%, or 37 times, depending on the study and the level of alcohol use. This is really concerning because adults with diagnosed mental health conditions were more likely to binge drink alcohol in the last month than those with no past year mental health conditions. So it definitely shows you where there's some increased risk, and Charlotte's going to keep sharing some additional data points with you.
I have to remember to unmute myself. That's always the challenge, right? Have you unmuted, or are you just looking like you're talking? Thanks, Michelle, for getting us started looking at some of the statistics. So let's take a look at a few more. Historically, suicide has been the leading cause of death for people with addiction. And it's actually estimated that 20 to 30% of overdose deaths are suicides. It's difficult to know if an overdose is a suicide because it's hard to determine intent in the absence of a note. Another factor that contributes to this is that the individual may be without an explicit intent to die right now, but also not care about the potential risk of their actions. Substance use disorders are twice as likely, or those individuals struggling with substance use disorders are twice as likely to have a mood or anxiety disorder, and half of individuals with a mental health condition will have a substance use disorder in their lifetime. Whereas only 5% of adults without any mental health conditions in the past year will experience a substance use disorder. So this just kind of continues to show us how those intersections occur. When we look at the co-occurrence of mental health and substance use disorder, it's the rule, not the exception. You can see here that it's demonstrated in this graphic that over 50% of those with a substance use disorder also have a mental health condition. That accounts for about 13.1 million adults. It's also really important to note that in 2019, COD affected 397,000 youth aged 12 to 17. So this always gives me goosebumps because I know in general in our communities, throughout our state, throughout the United States, services for youth is limited. Services in general is limited, but it's even more limited for youth. Understanding the impacts of addressing individuals as having COD versus individual diagnosis is critically important. When looking at youth and adults who receive treatment for both a mental health condition and substance use disorder, we noticed a continued deficit. You can see that only 1.3% of youth aged 12 to 17 years old received treatment for both conditions. This is not even where my daughter, for example, was able to get. We could not get that treatment. So, and it makes sense if you look at how our system is as far as being able to provide these services in general and then bringing it to that youth level. For adults, treatment for both conditions range from 7.8 to 12.7%, depending on the severity of their mental health condition. However, again, it's not always readily apparent. whether the co-occurring mental health condition is directly caused by substance use or is an independent disorder merely appearing alongside the substance use disorder. And we still need to be looking at both. A national survey on drug use and health suggests that mental health conditions, severe mental health conditions in particularly, commonly co-occur with substance misuse in the general adult population, and that many individuals with CODs go untreated. Also, individuals with CODs often experience stigma, mistrust, and low treatment engagement because the treatments are typically focused on one or the other. I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Michelle now.
Yeah, there's lots of other reasons why we also want to think about addressing these as co-occurring versus individual diagnoses. First, individuals with CODs are more likely to be hospitalized. And we know this is a problem since bed capacity continues to decline despite increased mental health needs and substance use related hospitalizations. And having CODs is often linked to rehospitalization for non-behavioral health reasons. If individuals also face chronic physical health conditions, houselessness or housing insecurity, if they're a military veteran, have past involvement in the carceral system, or if they've experienced adverse life events like childhood trauma or partner violence, their risk for suicide is even greater. We also want to address these together because suicide is a common risk factor that really pertains to nearly all CODs, and suicide and trauma are common across most combinations of CODs, causing an even greater risk for any individual diagnoses. Substance use can induce or exacerbate suicide ideation and behaviors, especially for clients with CODs. Substance use disorders alone increase suicidality, but the addition of other mental disorders, it doubles the already heightened risk. Efforts to provide treatment that meets these unique needs have gained momentum over the past 2 decades, but not enough to keep up with the increased need for services. According to SAMHSA in 2018, almost every substance use treatment facility reported having clients in treatment with diagnosed CODs, but only half of those facilities said that they could provide tailored programs and group treatment for individuals with CODs. In one study, only 18% of addiction programs and 9% of mental health service programs were rated as COD capable. So there's still definitely a big gap. Finally, in many settings, there's of course a significant lack of screening for CODs or for suicide. And we know that failure to screen and treat as a co-occurring disorder is only the beginning of a problematic domino effect. So this is going to lead to a lack of assessment, a lack of diagnosis, a lack of treatment, and all of this reduces the chances of achieving long-term recovery for either or both substance use, mental health, and suicide. We don't want to spend a bunch of time here so that we can focus on the more hopeful and pragmatic pieces as evidence-based promising practice. But suffice it to say, you are likely aware of or have even experienced many different barriers for accessing services. So the more we can help alleviate both individual and systemic barriers, the better we can serve individuals with CODs and the lower their risk for suicide. So in addition to the promising practices that we'll share, if you can put support behind policies that help address any of these barriers, that can also be a good use of our energy and resources. Charlotte's going to get us started with the real stuff.
I was multitasking and answering a question in the back. So for those of you who didn't see it, Jill had a great question of how is COD capable determined? We're going to be providing a resource for you from SAMHSA. It's a 500-page resource that we read through very extensively in the midst of really trying to look at how we can combine that experience with our lived experience and how we could suggest all of us to be looking at this from multiple different lenses, but it gives very specific guidelines and actually speaks to the complications of why it's so hard for facilities to be really rated as a COD. Yeah, also, you're right, Kirk. Lack of training is a significant factor. You have to have systems that are trained up to actually provide both and providers that can address both, which is also, unfortunately, a barrier. All right, so I'm going to jump in here. I'm glad that these questions are coming through. That makes me feel hopeful that this is helpful. Let's explore some evidence-based and promising practices that really prompt community cultures that are supportive of individuals and their diagnoses. When considering essential services and strategies for working with individuals with COD, they should be person-centered. This means that we should always be treating people as individuals and equal partners in their care, healing, and recovery. We want to use a trauma-informed approach guided by these 6 principles: safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment of voice and choice, and consideration to cultural history and gender. Our approach should be comprehensive. We want individuals to be engaged in treatment and support services that address their co-occurring psychiatric symptoms, even if the origin of the co-occurring mental health condition is not clear. Whenever a substance is involved, intervention and/or treatment should be supportive of COD focus. Co-occurring capable programs have a higher level of integration in which there is recognition of signs and symptoms of both disorders, and there is competency in providing integrated treatment services for both at the same time. A comprehensive approach should be used across all levels of care, including inpatient, outpatient, peer-based, community-based, regardless of new or ongoing CODs, relapse, and/or long-term recovery. It's imperative that we use a recovery perspective. And when I say recovery perspective, we're talking about mental health as well. Sometimes we just put that into the category of substance use. This allows for recognition that recovery doesn't refer solely to a change in substance use, but also a change in an unhealthy way of living. 2 main features of a recovery perspective are that recovery is a long-term process for internal change, where individuals can really improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. It recognizes that internal changes proceed throughout various stages, and it's a process of change through which an individual improves their health and wellness, where they can live that self-directed life, where they can strive to reach their full potential. Even individuals with severe and chronic substance use disorders with help can overcome their substance use disorder and regain health and social function. When those positive changes and values become part of a voluntarily adopted lifestyle, that is called being in recovery. Achieving sobriety or improved mental health can be a major step in building feelings of self-efficiency and confidence to further achieve recovery around mental health conditions. It can be a turning point in advocacy for their personal growth, improving their function, and meeting their recovery goals. It's a strong indicator of why COD treatment can enhance long-term recovery. Understanding that most will need substantial rehabilitation and habilitation, including initial learning and acquisition of life skills. It's also important to address real-life problems early in treatment services. Indicators of recovery include improved health, better ability to care for oneself and others, increased independence, enhanced self-worth. All of these are indicators in and of themselves of protective factors from suicide. When approaching what it looks like to work across systems to address these intersectional issues, we want to consider what makes long-term recovery more likely with addressing environmental and social conditions. Although there is no empirical treatment for suicide, we can use interventions that reduce symptoms of SUDs and mental health conditions to help mitigate suicide risk and decrease self-harm behaviors by doing things like improving mood and enhancing support and coping skills. Remembering effective COD strategies are suicide prevention. We can start by continuing to create and build community systems that address and support housing insecurity. According to our local Marion and Polk County Health Improvement Plan, which I had the honor and opportunity to participate in, it looks from 2021 to 2025, half of our community members actually spent 30% or more of their gross income on rent. And before COVID, it was estimated that 1,095 of our community members were experiencing houselessness. While creating action plans for work in this area, the improvement plan really aims to align the community health systems to address health and safety in relation to homelessness, reduce the risk of becoming houseless or returning to houselessness, and advocating for increased housing supply. So when we're considering solutions to this, we can strive by, as Gally said earlier, decreasing silo work, engaging in local community initiatives. We can look at systems that have already been used that build structures to increase housing for our community. An example of that would be Oxford housing. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Oxford housing. We definitely don't have enough of it, but it also contributes to COD specific needs. Okay, so Oxford housing does things like provide peer support and accountability, growth of independent living skills. It increases security and is inclusive of families. It increases confidence. It gives them sustainability. It gives all those skills that are needed in the midst of finding recovery. There's also some supportive permanent housing models. An example would be, clicked too fast, sorry. An example would be something that was called the Pathways to Housing. This was a Tulsa housing and recovery program. It was a 5-year collaborative funded program between mental health centers and housing providers that offered substance use disorder mental health services and supportive housing to individuals who were experiencing CODs and houselessness. What was so amazing about this is the significant success that was demonstrated. So we have systems and structures that we could look into that have been effectively used. How do we look at our systems? How do we look at legislation to make an impact here? In this particular example, 94% of clients were actually able to retain housing for 12 months or longer. 70% of them at 6 months scored minimal to no risk for substance use. 79% self-reported a reduction in their trauma symptoms after 6 months. 81% of them received trauma-related treatment gain at 6 months. There is a known increased link with suicide risk related to trauma. That's significant. 81% received a decrease in trauma-related issues and treatment. 100% of them were actually successfully linked to healthcare services through peer support and nurse-led assessment and triage. So now let's look at substance use. Our local systems can contribute to making an impact in regards to this topic. Again, we're going to use our local 2021 improvement plan. In my county anyways, Marion County, all counties should have one. So lean into that. That's a great way to not silo and to continue to work on what our communities are working on. This plan for us included a goal to have a responsive system with adequate acute and long-term recovery support and treatment. And how they are looking at doing that is addressing prevention by perception. Increased perception of harm leads to decreased use. An example would be smoking. Looking at the Oregon Youth Survey, the perception of harm is really high with that, and the reported use is really low. So for injury prevention, I was going out to our schools and teaching on substance use and what to look at. And the youth would admit that too. There was so much education and knowledge around smoking. It stinks, like all the things. They knew that people could get sick from it. There was this huge movement that happened to really bring awareness to that. And that awareness, that increased perception of harm made a huge difference. Also addressing gaps between rural and urban areas. We hear this a lot. Promoting relationships between substance use and overall health. Reducing depression, improving access to behavioral health care. This approach addresses substance use and it correlates with mental health by gearing it towards that COD approach. Okay. I know these are some pretty heavy slides and I'm going fast, so please work with me with this. I want to get you all of this information. And again, we're more than happy to provide it. So if you're trying to jot down notes or you have questions, I'm hoping to give you time for that. Now I really want to look at this second strategy, and it's about promoting skill building to address deficits in functioning. We want to consider what practical assistance in life management is. Is it tangible support that will help with everyday functional needs? We can think about this in relation to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's been around forever. It's consistent. It stays there. We know that it's necessary. So assistance with basic living skills and needs, psychological safety, belonging, love, esteem, cognitive. Independent living programs can actually provide exactly those things and can be extremely effective. And this has been demonstrated in the past and now. A great example of an effective independent living program actually came from the Foster Care Act of 1999. So because it was hard to get, in my situation, because it was so hard to get help with our current system for my daughter, I made one of the most heartbreaking decisions I've ever made in my life and leaned into our system and asked them to help me. And that meant handing over custody of my own child, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't find help. I could not find resources. Because of that, she did gain something amazing, which was this independent living program. And there's really cool things happening there that we can think about. How can we take this model and move it across other systems? How can we move it across the lifespan? This program included training on things as simple as basic living skills. How do you do laundry? How do you grocery shop? How do you navigate the world? How do you go to college? How do you search for a job? The services that were provided were vast and supportive of individual needs as they started navigating what it looked like to live out in the world and to have a healthy life. The benefits included tons of things, including how do we even independently start living? How can we help fund you to get kitchen pans so that you can eat food in your empty apartment, a computer so you can attend school, helping with things like deposits to get them into housing? That was just a few of the things that were covered there. So again, all of this support was so helpful for individuals to achieve self-sufficiency prior to and after leaving foster care. Those basic needs were being met as an essential foundation to supporting mental health. So it would be wonderful if we could think about ways to create, fund, and support more of these programs, again, across the lifespan and throughout our communities. Thinking about supporting individuals, let's chat about some support services in the community with the COD lens, okay? It's important to include substance use treatment and mental health services that help support individuals' recovery and are provided by peers. The peers who provide these services have lots of different titles, okay? Peer recovery support specialists, peer providers, recovery coaches. Research suggests that services that are helping people with mental health conditions and substance use disorders with clinical and functional outcomes can be really benefited by peer support. We just talked about how there's a lack of resources. Peers are an amazing resource. We've learned a lot about how our lived experience contributes significantly to recovery, not only for ourselves, but for others. All of these things were demonstrated and evaluated and looked at. And some of the items that they looked at were what did it look like in regards to rates of abstinence and relapse, treatment engagement and satisfaction, adherence to treatment plans and completion, housing stability, as we discussed earlier, mental health conditions, symptoms, knowledge about mental health conditions and substance use disorder. It's so limited. Family functioning, including parenting abilities. Peer-based programs are considered mutual support. They have a significant impact on co-occurring disorder outcomes and recovery and include access to social supports, such as non-clinical professionals and peers who can help individuals really initiate and maintain long-term recovery by being role models for successful recovery and healthy living. There's empirical evidence that shows participation in peer-based mutual support programs for COD recovery contributes substantially to members' progress in COD recovery and really should be encouraged. Some of those positive outcomes include fewer days of alcohol or other substance use, better scores of mental health, fewer self-reported substance use-related problems, greater treatment attendance, and possibly increased alcohol abstinence and decreased drinks per day over time, relapse prevention techniques. Among veterans with SUD and depression, there were lower scores of depression and lower future alcohol use reported. From individuals involved in this type of support, their perceived benefits of peer-based recovery match what the meetings offer and include. So fellowship building, camaraderie, affiliation, a sense of community, spiritual needs being addressed, safe space to share without fear of judgment or rejection, learning skills and tools to facilitate recovery in life, emotional acceptance, feeling empowered, developing group trust, which can allow the ability to develop feelings honestly while focusing on recovery from both conditions. Developing that sense of hope for recovery and having access to therapy or therapeutic services that actually might otherwise be inaccessible related to things like no insurance, or we all know our accessibility to services for counseling or therapeutic services have only continued to get less. So all of these, again, are protective factors when we're looking not only at relapse prevention, but the connection of suicide with CODs. So perspective of COD series of steps to plan, achieve, and maintain in dual recovery and structure that provides acceptance and support is important. They offer direction for recovery that's based on years of collective experience, allowing for the opportunity to draw on experiences that have been encountered during the progression of COD and the process of recovery. Some things to consider is that if peer support is not COD focused, there may be confusion about appropriate role of psychiatric medications that can take place and confusion about medication use for medication-assisted sobriety. An example would be Suboxone or methadone, which are both forms of medication-assisted sobriety. In a non-COD peer support service, there may be that confusion or bias. And when that happens, it can create situations where advice might be given to stop meds, which can cause reoccurrence of symptoms of mental health conditions or substance use relapse. Newcomers may recognize that bias, feel uncomfortable, keep much of their recovery secret, and therefore it compromises their long-term recovery. And interpersonal connectedness. We know in general, when we look at suicide prevention, connectedness is one of the most impactful contributors to people choosing life. So when we look at someone having COD, recovery, peer base, and overall general health, it's important because that interpersonal connectedness can be really hard for individuals with COD to establish at baseline. It can be difficult for them to maintain close relationships. And it's important that they're in a setting where that's really enhanced, where they have an easier time building rapport and developing an alliance with members and sponsors. So I'm actually going to cover some COD programs here shortly. They're going to be linked in a resources page, which you're going to receive as a download at the end of this presentation. Okay, so we'll be giving you resources for all of this. Again, we don't want you to have to read a 500-page document. So we did it for you, but you can also find this information on SAMHSA's website in their tip 42 document. It is a huge wealth of knowledge. If you have time, I would encourage you, dig through it. Interestingly, these programs are not often publicized and can be extremely difficult to learn about, which is why we get so excited to bring them forward to people. Coming from a background in which I spent a significant amount of time and resources trying to navigate the world of substance use disorder and mental health conditions, I myself did not know about them. And my daughter spent 6 months in inpatient rehab, and they didn't know about it. They didn't provide these resources to her. So there's some big gaps there, okay? With that, I encourage you again to be thinking about how your agencies, organizations, communities can support these. How can we bring this knowledge forward? How can we think about policy and legislation to fund these peer-based programs? So with that, let's jump into some of that, okay? I'm going to start with Smart Recovery. Some of you may know these, some of you may not. Smart Recovery is not specifically listed as a COD program. However, it's considered a self-empowering, free mutual support program that focuses on ideas and techniques to help one change their life from one of what they would say is self-destruction and unhappy to one that's constructive and satisfying. It doesn't use labels like addict or alcoholic. It teaches scientifically validated methods designed to empower one to change and to develop a more positive lifestyle. It focuses on learning coping skills that work well with short and long-term recovery, including using some evidence-based approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and it encompasses the whole circle. They actually have tools for families. books for families to work through this process for themselves. It's one of the few programs I've seen out there that looks at the trauma that family and parents experience as their loved ones are struggling with something like this. Dual Recovery Anonymous is a program that helps in recovery from both chemical dependency and emotional or psychiatric conditions by focusing on relapse prevention and actively improving quality of life. And a community of mutual support learning, what's happening is it really tries to avoid the risks that lead back to alcohol and drug use, as well as reducing symptoms of emotional and psychiatric conditions, is the easiest way to say it. Double Trouble in Recovery. This one always makes me giggle because it kind of puts a little bit of humor into it. It uses a 12-step that is based off of the traditional 12-step program. So some of the differences as we think about Smart Recovery, for example, it doesn't use that. There can be barriers sometimes when we're looking at 12-step programs, regardless of whether it's co-occurring or not, because sometimes individuals don't want what seems to be like a religious filter. My daughter had that pushback for a long time. Now she's like, my higher self can, or my higher power can be that book on that shelf, right? But not everyone leans into that. So it's good to have a variety, right? So another one that really leans into that, but actually adds an additional 5 steps is Dual Diagnosis Anonymous. They also, again, have that hybrid approach. So they have the traditional 12 steps, and then their additional 5 steps actually differ because what it does is it underscores, those 5 steps underscore the potential need for medical management, clinical intervention, and therapy. So really tying in the 12-step concepts and relying on yourself and higher power, but bringing in all of those additional resources that our communities may possibly have. So let's quickly talk about another well-known resource, but as we all are probably aware, a potentially limited access resource right now, which is counseling. We know that the nature of counseling activity is really matched by the client's motivation and readiness. That being said, it may benefit in areas such as behavioral management, relapse prevention plans, providing a sense of being cared for. Again, one of those basic human needs. When considering how the system of counseling can be enhanced in regards to COD treatment and recovery, it's important that every agency that offers substance use counseling has a clear protocol in place that addresses the recognition and treatment or referral and follow-up of people who may be having thoughts of suicide. My personal experience and what my daughter went through is that is not the case. I actually had to remove her from one place that she was at and take her into a hospital to get treatment. And what happened is she actually ended up in a pediatric psychiatric unit. So it's not necessarily the norm or the case for this to be in place. In 2014, Brown and Green stated that follow-up services for those individuals who are positive for suicide risk may effectively prevent future harmful behaviors. In fact, as you look at the continued studies that are coming out, they would say it's one of the most effective ways to prevent further thoughts or actions of suicide is follow-up, caring contact. Another tangible and beneficial area of assistance is employment services. I think we continue to see a huge impact here. We continue to see increased individuals experiencing houselessness related to employment. And although we're not going to discuss this section in depth, some important things to think about here is secure housing and gainful employment are among some of the greatest stressors for people. Workforce participation is not only a value of economic contribution, it also enhances individual self-efficiency, improves self-identity, offers a sense of belonging with society at a large, and provides a way for people to build relationships with others and improve their quality of life. Again, all of these are protective factors when we think about suicide. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle now.
Let's think about another strategy, and Dr. Wolf brought this one up just in the chat a while ago. We need to be thinking about developing the workforce. Minimally, both clinical and non-clinical staff working with clients who have substance use disorders or other CODs should have basic suicide prevention skills.
Hey, Michelle, I'm not sure if you're meaning to, but we see the presenter view if that's
Oh,
what
I'm
you're
so
wanting to
sorry.
show us. No, it's totally fine. I just wanted to let you know, just in case.
Try that again. How about that one? Okay,
Yeah.
great. That's better than reading my notes, promise. So we know that that sort of basic level of suicide prevention skills is not always the case. Specialized suicide specific training and advanced skills are pretty limited. So providing professional development, including training, education, and competencies for staff and providers really is critical, because inadequate staff training is cited as one of the significant barriers to receiving treatment. And there's a lot of burnout and high turnover when folks don't feel equipped with the tools and skills that they need to even be in these positions. As an example of an evidence-based approach to workforce development that many of you are familiar with is zero suicide. You know, it's a framework used across systems to identify gaps in which, despite being engaged in services, clients are being lost to suicide. So zero suicide was created for healthcare and behavioral health settings. However, we're seeing this framework implemented in other agency settings in Oregon and nationally. And while workforce development is only one component of zero suicide, they've really developed some great tools to help agencies create their own training matrices, for example, to determine who needs what level of skill, and then what training resources are available and can be utilized to meet those different levels of need. A win that you all have been an integral part in getting up and running in Oregon is the passage of legislation actually requiring continuing education for suicide risk assessment, treatment, and management for both mental health and behavioral health licenses. And of course, now there's energy, and we want to continue to put energy towards creating the infrastructure that makes these trainings accessible to all healthcare professionals. So the more we can streamline awareness and availability of these resources, the better. Workforce development is also related to strategy 4, and that's to engage the community in building a network of safety. This really allows us to shift from being sort of reactive to proactive and preventive, because we can't rely solely on mental health professionals to sort of solve it all in terms of everything that may lead to a suicide crisis. Instead, we should be really identifying lots of individuals, professionals and otherwise, who can help prevent suicide. So while the goal is to build skills and capacity, we don't all need the same high level of training to support individuals struggling with thoughts of suicide. There are many different roles, and there's a role for everyone who wants one in helping prevent suicides in our community. The key here is really to create a large enough network with all different skill levels so that when a person is showing signs of suicide risk, someone notices and can connect them with others in the network of safety. This means we want to identify and train individuals everywhere from gatekeepers and safety connectors to those who can provide suicide intervention and safety planning, to those who can provide effective therapeutic supports or post-vention care after a suicide event. Finally, the support, insight, problem solving that communities have and can accomplish within themselves, taking into account their own unique contexts, skills, strengths, all of these things can help build them, help them build an ideal network of safety that will prevent suicide deaths and will specifically meet their needs of their community. So we really encourage you to think about, what does it look like in your community or your agency? Who could you engage, especially in the context of supporting individuals with CODs and substance use? Who within your community should have a higher level of training to provide intervention and safety planning or post-vention support? Who often supports individuals or individuals who need referrals to other people? So maybe they're in crisis or distress. How do we support? Who supports them and who refers them? Who would be good gatekeepers and connectors to really recognize the warning signs and connect individuals with somebody who's trained to do a suicide intervention? Who's well positioned to notice signs of distress, and who's well connected, with all of the other community resources? And finally, what communities or groups maybe would benefit from some increased awareness and basic gatekeeper skills? So you might consider who's at greater risk for mental health challenges, substance use disorders, or suicide, and who supports those individuals. You may have some local data to help you identify some higher risk groups that could be a good focus for some of these additional skills. So to help you envision it, we're going to share a quick illustration of how we think about a strong network of safety. Now, this isn't necessarily a mathematically accurate representation, but assume we're looking at a small snapshot of a community. So in every community, there are individuals out there who are struggling with thoughts of suicide. And if we can have about 5% of our community trained with intervention, therapeutic, or postvention skills, about 15% trained as gatekeepers and connectors, and about 80% of them having some basic awareness and gatekeeper skills, the likelihood of a person with thoughts of suicide sort of bumping into somebody who can help is pretty high. And that's our goal with a network of safety. So here you're seeing a number of different trainings that would fall into these categories. And in the state of Oregon, of course, we're privileged to have our Big River programs all working together to create these networks of safety in our communities, really interlinking the different services that would be available to support individuals. Of course, this isn't an exhaustive list of all the different available trainings or even evidence-based ones out there, but we want to provide some examples so that as we continue to think about how individuals throughout our state could become well-positioned to support one another with some of these skills. All right, our fifth strategy, we're rolling through them. This is the last strategy we'll share. This one is about creating equitable approaches to COD treatment and suicide prevention. Some individuals and communities have been impacted by multiple forms of oppression: racism, sexism, classism, ableism, homophobia, all the isms. Important to consider high-risk populations in the context of their social identities and the systems that have impacted their risk for suicide and CODs rather than individual characteristics alone. Individuals' social identities, of course, impact their ability to navigate systems often not made for them. So when thinking about equity in the context of suicide prevention, it is really important to address the systems, the environment, the social conditions that lead to barriers and gaps in opportunities for individuals, which leave them more vulnerable to CODs and suicide. To do this, we really need to interrogate some of our common sense assumptions and change the status quo to providing culturally relevant and responsive programs and services that really respect the lived experience, beliefs, traditions, values, strengths, and other protective factors of different communities. For individuals with CODs, building social connectedness, as Charlotte talked about, is really, really important. And if we can do that through having additional identity-based affinity groups that people can access, peer organizations, programs that reflect and affirm individuals' identities, these things can really create positive outcomes related to all of their CODs and concerns about suicide risk. A tool that you may be familiar with is the Equity Assessment Tool, which was originally developed for Oregon's first adult suicide intervention and prevention plan. And the Alliance Equity Advisory Committee has continued to build out and refine this tool for teams and organizations to help them try to center equity in their work. The tool offers some core concepts related to equity and suicide prevention, a readiness assessment, 5 different principles of equity directly related to suicide prevention, questions that folks can consider, and examples for each principle, as well as several sort of spot check reflection questions. This tool is available on the Alliance's website, so anyone looking for support or guidance in using this tool is also welcome to reach out to the Alliance. Anyone from our Equity Advisory would be eager to help out. There's a link there for you on the slide. We'll make sure you get that one as well in case it's not in the handout that Charlotte created for you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Charlotte one more time to wrap us up here.
Right, somehow we're managing to fit this all in. So thank you for letting us talk fast. You know, CODs account for a significant portion of our population. They're undertreated and are interconnected with suicide. Providing treatment, appropriate treatment, and support services to individuals' CODs is suicide prevention by decreasing known stressors that contribute to suicide risk and increasing life skills and coping strategies. Building a network of safety empowers individuals, agencies, and entire communities to be better prepared to identify and support individuals struggling with thoughts of suicide. My daughter now works in the recovery world, and she will advocate endlessly and gets nowhere, but she continues to advocate to say we need to be preparing people in these settings to know how to even talk about suicide. So she works deeply in the setting of substance use recovery. So another gap, right? How are we crossing this over? How are we thinking about mental health and substance use together? Creating equitable approaches to mental health promotion and suicide prevention by addressing those gaps and systemic barriers allows for more effective treatment and services for individuals with CODs. We just want to take a moment to thank you. In just a few moments, we're going to get you all to work together to brainstorm exactly those things. And they've done an amazing job of setting some time aside. And I'm going to have you all download something in a moment. But first, again, we just wanted to thank you for allowing us to share our passion with you. We appreciate that each and every one of you showed up, that you're here, that we appreciate everything you do for your continued time and commitment to a suicide safer Oregon. Okay. I will give, I don't know if I think I have like 4 minutes for questions, but what I want to do in the meantime is before we do questions is just really quickly show you that you're going to be going into breakout rooms. And as you're working together, we really want you to, again, we've said this lots of times, we want you to think about your organization, your agency, your community. What can you do to address these strategies that you see on the screen? As Gally said, how can we stop siloing this work? We come together, it becomes better, it becomes more powerful, it becomes more widespread. Think about how we can look at these strategies and consider policy and legislation. We're sitting here in the Oregon Alliance. How can we look at legislation to make impact across the intersections of substance use and suicide? So Michelle and I are going to download this brainstorming activity. I'll do it actually in a moment. And in the meantime, I'm going to give you an opportunity. Again, I think I have a couple minutes. We have a couple minutes for you all to ask questions. So I'm going to stop sharing this so I can download this. You are going to be having it come in your chat. It's going to include this, and it's also going to include the pages of resources that we have from this presentation. Although I will ask Michelle to put the link for the equity tool separate. All right, so let me stop sharing here for a moment.
And while you're doing that, I was actually hoping Annette could maybe give us some guidance. I wasn't sure based on the agenda if they were going to do this activity now, or if you are wanting to get to the other agenda items first.
You know, the other agenda item is Jill kind of telling people how you can go through the YSIP and find the substance abuse pieces in it. I'm wondering if it makes sense for us to move that to after the breakouts now. We had it scheduled before, but
I mean, I think we could go either way. I think it might be helpful to see where it is in the YSIP, so we could kind of frame up. And I'm noticing it's just a few minutes, so we're not gonna. Jill, what do you think?
Yep, I'll show you. It'll be underwhelming, which is the need for this presentation. But Annette or Jen, can you give me ability to share screen?
We have just a couple minutes left. Can I see if anyone has questions? Because we threw a lot of information out at everyone. Okay, that's okay. Does anyone have questions? It was a lot of information. Just want to make sure that you have at least a little bit of an opportunity.
This is Mary. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm actually driving right now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Just a quick question, and as we talk about intersectionality, I'm wondering, I know up here the Washington County schools all got Teen Intervene for drug and alcohol awareness, just a drug and alcohol prevention program. And as I'm applying this or doing this brief intervention work with kids, there's really not a mental health component to it. And so I'm wondering, and I don't know, what programs Teen Intervene comes out of or how that funding happens, but possibly looking for programs that are being applied that do have that intersectionality, that do deal with co-occurring disorders, mental health, and drug use. I guess that's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, I think that's a great ask, Mary. I can look more into it for you. I have historically looked for that in the past. And when I worked for our injury prevention program for the hospital, had the ability to create my own curriculum. So would have that added into the stuff that was coming out to the students. But I don't know that there's any programs out there that I know of through other places. So if anyone does, please feel free to share.
Hi, this is Sage Franklin at CERTS, which is Community Education Resources Training and Support. And we're contracted with our community care organization in Yamhill County to create some new peer support training that better equips peer supports that's driven by the peer supports and their feedback of what they wish they would have known when they started. And so I wanted to ask anybody if in the breakout sessions, if you happen to run across some things that do more preventative work in their scope and roles. If you could email me your suggestions at sage@certs.llc.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you for the email address. Can someone put that in the chat? And I would just say offhand, my daughter's actually a peer support specialist as well. And she will again continue to advocate that they don't receive suicide prevention or intervention training. And that's a important component in the work that they're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I don't want to overstay our time. I really want to make sure. Oh, I have one more hand up, I think.
I think that was just who spoke.
Okay, perfect. I don't want to overstay time, and I want to make sure Jill has time to really let you look at this YSIP concept. I do think it's really important as we do this work and think about legislation and policy to be looking at this. So thank you for your willingness to share and walk people through this, Jill.
Thank you, Michelle and Charlotte. That presentation was amazing. I learned a ton. And so I'm chewing on all things. I took lots of notes. So I just thank you for all the time and energy that you put into creating that presentation for us. It's incredible. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
So much. We're really glad to hear that someone found it helpful.
Echo what Gally says, and also my internet has crashed at least 3 times in this meeting. So if I crash, just move on with our lives. So I linked the Children and Family Behavioral Health website in the chat, which is where the YSIP 2024 initiatives are linked at the top, and then also directly linked the YSIP 2024 initiatives. So you can bookmark either one. But I just wanted to show you that there's 2 ways to find things in this very large document. One is by each of these top headers have a little 3 buttons over here. So if you were listening to the ODE school and OHA schools response and you're like, I want to know what those benchmarks for progress monitoring are, and what are we paying attention to, you can go and sort it by ODE and push apply, and then it will show you all of the initiatives that are led by ODE. And then if you go over here, the metrics that that Jennifer mentioned, the percent of schools who have adopted a board policy, percent of school districts that have a posted plan. And then at 6 months and at the end of the year, we put in the metrics updates with notes. So that's one way. If you have created a filter, then up here at the top, if you click this little down arrow and you tell it to take the filter off, the whole shebang comes back. If you are looking for an answer to the question, what are we doing for fill in the blank around population focus? Again, the 3 little dots here, click filter. So often a question I get is, what are we doing for the transitional aged youth, the 18 to 24-year-olds? So I'll just show you, if you click, and you can click more than one, and it'll filter for those. But if you click just to 18 to 24 and push apply, all of the initiatives that serve that population will show up. And so just for the record, I'm just going to scroll so you can see we're doing a lot of things for 18 to 24-year-olds. Some of them are shared things like, almost all of these are actually only 18 to 4. Here we go. Mobile crisis. Mobile crisis serves 18 to 24, so it shows up. And some of them are specific to that population, like the Oregon Colleges and Universities Suicide Prevention Project, which I need to change the name of. Okay, and then the third way, so you can filter by lead entity, you can filter by population of focus, or you can do control find. So on your keyboard, the control button plus the letter F brings up this thingamahooper. And so if you put in substance use and click next, it will show you where substance use shows up in anywhere in this document. So of note, here is the goal. Substance use disorders, our big goal is substance use disorders and mental health services are integrated when possible and coordinated when not fully integrated. And you will see that a big fat 0, like there's a big empty space there around specific initiatives that we're working on. And so there are a few areas of that in the YSIP where there's a goal, but not specific projects that we're working on, which is the reason for this presentation and to start this conversation. It doesn't mean that we're not doing anything around substances, to be clear. It just means that we haven't filtered it that way. Like we haven't named it that way. For example, all of the Michelle and Charlotte named the House Bill 2315 continuing education requirements that that is should be labeled as integrated substance use. That's a project that integrates the two. We just haven't done a good job of calling it out in the YSIP. And so sometimes it's like embedded in the narrative. So this one, as you can see, it's in the equity piece. And so it's under here, people with substance use disorders are listed in this population of focus. So all of that to say is please know the YSIP initiatives, go to that page, frequent it. And in our small group discussions, I will be eager to see the notes of where folks think we should be plugging things in. Because as it turns out, there is a gap. We have a gap. We are siloed, to Michelle and Charlotte's point.
I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and there's a Google Doc for everybody, for y'all to take notes on. I'm just going to visit each group individually one at a time to give you your links for that. So maybe expect a link to show up in your group 3 minutes max, but rooms will be open and then you'll get your Google Docs for notes.
Did everyone access that PDF? Because it's like not opening for me, of course. So if other people were able to get it, that's great. I'm going to stay here with you all if that's okay.
Oh wait, you don't want to record us, right? Right now, Jen?
It